Chileans are struggling to come up with a new constitution. There are gains and there are losses, but on one issue there's unity. The current Pinochet-era constitution must go.
Right now, we, the regular people on the street, have the chance to influence it, so that it's not just the politicians who are making decisions.
We're entering a new era, for Chile's history, but also for the world.
For a year, there's been debate about not only the wording of the constitution, but about who should rewrite it.
The wrong people were picked to be members of the Constitutional Convention. A constitution should be written by experts, by people who know what they're doing.
I think there is a lot of fear of change.
A first draft was written, only to fall at the last hurdle. This film tells the story of that failure, one that could be the beginning of a new Chilean constitution. In 2021, this became a place of hope for many Chileans, the Constitutional Convention. Valentina Miranda is one of its 155 elected members. Instead of attending university lectures, the student is helping write Chile's new constitution.
Creo que tener 21 años en un espacio así es brutal. Yo creo que
being the youngest person in a place like this at 21 is kind of brutal. I feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, and it is heavy. Representing the youth isn't easy, just because we're all so different. It's super complicated to define what we're all about. We're totally rebellious, but also super moralistic. It's really hard to set a good example.
Valentina Miranda comes from one of the poorest parts of the country. From early on, she experienced how unequal the distribution of money and opportunity throughout Chile really is, where basic services like education and healthcare are privatized.
The biggest shock was when my mom suddenly had to pay 3 times the previous rent. The Constitution doesn't guarantee a right of residence. So there's a lot of speculation of apartments and houses that churns out unbelievable profits. We almost lost our apartment. My mom had to sell the car so we could pay what we owed.
Y cuando me tuve que cambiar de liceo, y también me di cuenta de que
And I noticed in school, too, that the education system was geared towards those who could spend money on it. The same with the health system. When I was sick, I didn't get what I had hoped for. It's all really sad. And I realized it's all a structural problem.
School, university, hospital, pension. They all cost money. If you can afford it, you pay for a good education, good healthcare. If not, you either run up debt or put up with a poorly equipped public system. Valentina Miranda is fighting this two-tier society where only those with money have prospects, and where the state doesn't care for those who need help.
I've been waiting for an abdominal examination for 5 years to find out what I've got. And I still don't have an appointment. 5 years. And that's the norm for people who get by day to day. And at some point, that makes you angry.
In 2019, a slight increase in transport fares sent students storming the metro in the capital, Santiago. For many from the poorer districts, the rate hike was too much.
The only thing I thought was, crap, there are so few of us against the world. We're fighting a giant. I remember when we took to the streets in 2019. There were so few of us.
The majority of demonstrators remained peaceful, but some raided supermarkets and rioted in metro stations.
Yo creo que el papel de las protestas es bien importante porque
the role of the protests is very important. The social mobilization was a massive, all-encompassing protest, without political parties or organizations in charge. It was a spontaneous act of the people.
Soon, hundreds of thousands took to the streets. By then, it was about much more than just the cost of public transport. It was about reforming the health system, education, the rights of women, minorities, and indigenous people. The protests lasted for months. The entire system was in question, with calls to end the Pinochet-era constitution. The conservative government spoke of war and sent the military onto the streets for the first time since the Pinochet dictatorship. A state of emergency was declared in Santiago. More than 30 people were killed, thousands injured, many with eye injuries. According to human rights organizations, security forces used rubber bullets to target people's faces.
Y es recién el 2019, después de estas grandes protestas, que la derecha más conservadora.
Following the protests in 2019, the conservative ultra-right that had always blocked major changes to the Constitution accepted that it needed change. The Great Unity for Peace was a long process. The 2019 protests and those that came before were crucial to make the conservative elite understand that in order to preserve the stability of the country, it needed to change. And changing the Constitution was the most structural option.
In November 2019, President Sebastián Piñera gives in to the pressure on the streets. It's time to allow the people to have their say on whether a new constitution is needed. A referendum takes place a few months later. Posing the question, do you want a new constitution? The majority of those polled, 78%, says yes. When asked who should write the constitution, 79% say it should be the job of a civilian assembly and not left to a mix of civilians and lawmakers. Chile despertó, Chile awakened.
Creo que estamos viviendo acá un momento de cambio en la historia de Chile, pero también
We're entering a new era for Chile's history, but also for the world. And we're a part of it. We want a democratic solution and are seeking answers in a time of great uncertainty.
de respuesta a tiempos de incertidumbre.
Cristina Dorador is another member of the Constitutional Convention. The microbiologist comes from northern Chile, one of the driest regions in the world.
Bueno, nosotros vivimos en el desierto, por lo tanto un lugar que por definición tiene muy poca agua.
We live in a desert, a place where by definition there is already very little natural water. The paradox is that this is a mining region, and extracting those raw materials takes a lot of water. The effect on the environment is immense.
Dorador is part of the governmental organization, the National Commission for Scientific and Technological Research, and is campaigning for the right to drinking water. That's because water sources in Chile are almost all privatized, unlike nearly anywhere else in the world. Cristina Dorador remembers the impact of water shortages in the 1980s.
Y esta era mi casa aquí en esta esquina.
I grew up here, on the corner. Of course, it looks very different today. Back then, it was a very simple house. We didn't have water every day, maybe once every 2 days. So we always had to collect water, like everywhere in the north. Later, things got a bit better, and these days water is supplied to the village from a desalination plant.
But not all parts of Chile have profited from such technical progress. And even where processed water is in supply, it's often very expensive, too expensive. In some places, trucks deliver clean drinking water to the villagers. Here, water is a commodity where demand determines the price in a free market. It's a basic tenet of the Constitution, set in stone by the Pinochet dictatorship.
En Chile, por la Constitución Política 1980,
The 1980 Constitution left the Chilean state with a very weak role.
ciertos bienes y servicios a la ciudadanía cuando el sector privado.
It only intervenes when the private sector can no longer guarantee certain services that the population has a right to. This relationship between the economy and the state would be changed if we had a social state. If the state starts promoting social rights. And in an unequal society like Chile's, that could be a decisive step to reducing the gap between rich and poor.
Those who can afford it buy indefinite rights to water and hoard them, legally, or sell them. But under this system, only few profit. The large agricultural firms that pump out groundwater for business. Growing avocados for export to Europe and elsewhere is especially water-intensive. The United Nations has declared access to water a human right, but it's not, according to the Chilean constitution.
¡Fuerza! Las aguas robadas serán recuperadas. Las aguas robadas serán recuperadas.
Cristina Dorador's coming to the convention to lobby for water rights. Several others here have been campaigning for years for free access to water.
The first thing we want is to make water a human right. Everyone must have unhindered access to water, and that's not currently guaranteed. That means human rights are being violated in Chile, because anyone who is thirsty but has no money to buy water doesn't drink. That is terrible and simply undignified.
The human right to water is included in the draft constitution, but what will happen to the licenses that have already been issued remains unclear.
Obviamente implica también un modelo de desarrollo que es sustentable con el medio ambiente y que es equitativo en la sociedad.
The resolution also includes a sustainable economic model. Environment and climate are just as highly prioritized as human beings. Obviously, that raises the question whether that would cause economic problems because of the impact on Chile's most important economic sector, mining. But I don't think so. I think the resolution is very fair. That's a step forward, not only with regards to water rights, but also natural resources. Taking economic steps and respecting water rights at the same time, by defining water as a public commodity and regulating its use. That has to be written into legislation and policy making later. But I think as a first step to ensuring fairer economic growth, this is very good.
The current economic model is a legacy of the military dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. The general seized power in a 1973 coup, toppling the socialist government of Salvador Allende. 17 years of authoritarian dictatorship followed. More than 3,000 people were killed or disappeared under Pinochet's rule. Almost 40,000 were tortured. Even today, the atrocities of the Pinochet era haven't all been addressed, and an amnesty law that long shielded Pinochet from prosecution still exists. In 1980, Pinochet passed a new neoliberal constitution. It was the brainchild of Chilean economists educated in the United States. They aimed to keep state intervention to a minimum, leaving the market to sort the rest. The economic boom benefited a tiny elite. Since the transition to democracy, there have been minor reforms, but the core of the Pinochet constitution has remained largely unchanged. Now there will be a new constitution, and Raúl Celis is one of those tasked with creating it. He's a member of Chile's conservative political elite and is a founding member of the Party of National Renewal.
Mi espacio siempre ha sido a favor de la Convención Constitucional.
I always backed the constitutional process. I put myself forward as a candidate who would come up with a good text. I'm a lawyer and one of the convention's deputy presidents. And it's my intention, it's my duty not to fail, but to come out of this with a decent constitution.
No sacar constitución o no sacar una buena constitución. Yo soy de una derecha que es más bien una derecha moderada.
I belong to the moderate right wing. If you ask me about sexual diversity, for example, I respect the right to gay marriage. I think it's right for us as a conservative party to be open to such changes.
The
members of the Constitutional Convention are elected directly. They have a year to come up with a new draft. The assembly is formed by Chile's people. Half are women, half are men. "17 places are reserved for members of indigenous communities, from which the first chair of the assembly is chosen.
Los países quebrados, como es este, en estos momentos,
A divided society like ours doesn't find its way back together overnight. We have a lot of work ahead of us. But now at last, we have this meeting of Chile's diverse peoples. Those who have been disenfranchised until now, indigenous peoples, people who've traveled from remote parts of the country. More than 40% are under 40. Half are women, and all sexual orientations are represented. There's never been a place of dialogue like this, with this representation. And despite the difficulties, it is a good start.
Alexis Caiwan was elected to one of the seats reserved for indigenous people. He's a member of the Mapuche. To take part, he's moved from the countryside to the capital, Santiago.
Nosotros como Mapuche tenemos que tomar el desafío. El desafío de poder llevar.
We Mapuche must accept the challenge to raise our voices, one that was previously unheard.
Esta convención, ¿cierto? Y socializarla para poderla dejar plasmada en las necesidades que hemos tenido por años.
For me, the new constitution must be multinational and intercultural. Indigenous peoples must be given recognition. Without that, there is no new constitution.
No existe una nueva constitución.
The Mapuche are Chile's biggest indigenous group, but in the current constitution, they're not mentioned once. For years, there has been sometimes violent conflict between the Mapuche and the Chilean state. Alexis Caiwan wants a different approach.
Porque sería la primera vez que los pueblos originarios estuvieran
It would be the first time that indigenous people were put on a level with everyone else, and in this case on a level with those in political power. Now we can make our demands directly and not be hidden behind a shadow of bureaucracy, discrimination, prejudice. That's what a new constitution means to me.
But right from the beginning, there's controversy over who should write this new draft constitution.
Se dice mucho que es el único órgano de este tipo que ha redactado una constitución.
It's often said that this is the only assembly of its kind in the world to write a constitution. And yes, the selection of its members was totally inadequate. A constitution should be written by experts, by people who understand the subject matter, or at least by a parliament whose job is not only to write a constitution.
Fueron elegidos primero con un sistema electoral completamente distinto al que se aplican en todas
I think this is where the first mistake was made. The direct election of the members. In all other elections, from local to parliamentary to presidential elections, there is a different election system. Direct election makes it much easier for independent candidates. And people voted for these independent candidates because they'd had enough of the parties. So there was a massive bias towards the independents and seats reserved for the indigenous peoples. And that's why I think there's no way this is a representative constitution.
Me motiva a afirmar que no es una constitución en ningún caso representativa.
Among the conservatives, there were great reservations about turning Chile into a multinational state. But it's crucial for indigenous people to be represented in the Constitutional Convention. They show that several nations living together does not have to mean the division of the country. It's the opposite. This is about actively recognizing important parts of society.
The Mapuche's native land is in southern Chile. For centuries, there were no borders here. The Mapuche held out for more than 300 years against Spanish colonialism and remained autonomous. It wasn't until Chile gained its independence from Spain that Chilean troops took the Mapuche land by force. In the Mapudungun language, Mapuche means people of the land. A connection to nature remains central to their way of life. Something Alexis Kaiwan agrees with.
Entonces hoy día nosotros, como propuesta general mía, a través de la misma voz,
one of our central demands is the return of our illegally seized territories and the forests that have been cut down and our sites of spiritual significance that are not respected.
Los bosques nativos han sido erosionados.
Where should our culture live? Where can we connect to it? In a world full of concrete? That's impossible. A majority of the Mapuche people have no space. First, that needs to be returned.
The original forests were turned into plantations, and power stations and trash dumps were built on places once sacred to the Mapuche. As a result, the standoff between Mapuche and the Chilean government often leads to conflict. But the constitutional reform process doesn't have the support of all the Mapuche. Some fear that the current situation won't change, and they'd rather fight for their autonomy. Radical groups call for armed resistance. There are repeated attacks on logging companies with trucks set on fire and houses burned.
Nosotros los Mapuche Huilliche somos parlamentarios. Somos gente que ha querido conversar siempre.
We Mapuche are people who want to talk and achieve something, but we want to do that with parliamentary representation, which we haven't had so far. If the Mapuche had always been peaceful, they would have been wiped out sooner.
Entonces, también hay que reconocer que el espíritu de la lucha...
So, we have a duty to recognize the struggle and the way other groups think. Even if we don't share the same ideals, it doesn't mean their struggle is any less legitimate.
Pero eso no significa que nosotros no pensemos que es válida.
Alexis Kaiwan is taking a different approach. The teacher and musician wants to be part of the dialogue on a new constitution, and thus give the Mapuche an active role in Chilean politics. They want to be heard and have rights as a minority in Chile. For as long as Alexis Kaiwan can remember, that's not how it's been in Chile.
Yo nací en dictadura. Y la dictadura
I was born in a dictatorship and lived through it.
Es hambre,
The hunger,
es pobreza,
the poverty,
es discriminación
the discrimination,
y desigualdad.
the inequality.
Yo la conocí, yo la viví. Que hoy día tenemos una mirada muy diferente de la política. Nosotros los padres nos dedicamos a explotarlo. También sería bueno poder vivir esa etapa. Hoy día los mapuches o los pueblos originarios deberían tener la misma oportunidad.
Today we want equal opportunities. We Mapuche and other indigenous groups are just as capable as other Chileans. We have to get out of this vicious cycle. Everyone should have the chance to evolve, not just a certain group of people who seem important.
La facultad de hacer o desarrollar.
With all the members of the Constitutional Convention bringing their own concerns to the table, there are disputes and conflict. Ultimately, they have to agree on a set of common words and ideas, principles and practicalities. What is Chile made of? And what needs to be written firmly into the Constitution? What can be left to legislation? Hours of convention sessions are broadcast live to show everyone how the new Constitution is being drafted.
Often during the debate, when everyone is speaking very technically, I start to lose the thread. But then I read up on it and understand what they mean. Then I form my opinion and can have my say. The people out there write to me on social media saying, I understand what you said, but when so-and-so, a lawyer, spoke, I didn't understand a thing. You translated it into everyday language, not court jargon. And you understood what they were saying.
The plenary votes and rewrites the draft. In the final phase, that often means working right into the night.
Because there was so much to do, it was really exhausting. We didn't get much sleep. We worked weekends and nights. It was really intense and emotionally draining.
The draft constitution is finished, with celebrations in Antofagasta.
It was emotional and moving to be able to be here and share that with the others. I'm grateful for the work that we've done.
The new constitution has 388 articles, a lot. And it all needs to be explained to the people, because after all, it is they who will decide whether it will be passed and implemented. Lines form as people wait to see the text. The draft constitution becomes a bestseller.
Y finalmente pasamos de ser un Estado subsidiario, que era la...
With this draft, we finally managed to get away from the neoliberal ideals that over the past few decades have prevented a social state guaranteeing certain rights.
Y donde el compromiso
It's a republic of solidarity.
Based on the European state model, it's meant to ensure that everyone has access to important social services, education, health, pension funds, a shift away from the neoliberal model of the Pinochet era. In the very first article, Chile is described as multinational and ecological. Special rights are accorded to indigenous groups, and environmental protection is strengthened. There's to be a 50% female quota for many public sector jobs, and for Valentina Miranda, most importantly,
the most emotional moment for me was when we secured the right to sexual self-determination and the legalization of abortion. At first, we couldn't believe it.
It's a feminist draft. Abortion is controversial in a society dominated by church and patriarchy. A complete ban on abortion had been eased in Chile in 2017, but it was still only allowed in exceptional cases. For years, activists have been calling for more women's rights. But even just working on the Constitution brings risks. Women are verbally abused and get death threats for participating. And fake news starts making the rounds.
For example, they said the right to property would no longer be guaranteed, and people would lose their houses, be dispossessed, and there'd be no more private health insurance, and private schools would have to close. All these lies were spread by the right wing. Unfortunately, their campaign focused on undermining the constitutional reform process.
Sí, hubo mucho fake news. Fue una campaña además fundamentalmente digital.
There was lots of fake news in a campaign that took place mostly online. And that really damaged the new constitution because people get their news from social media and don't check the facts. This massive amount of distorted and one-sided information led to people thinking, well, I'd rather stick with the old constitution. We know what we've got there.
The text is plagued by vague formulations and uncertainty over how the laws can be implemented. The biggest obstacle is Chile's conservative society. One major controversial issue is the recognition of indigenous groups and the definition of Chile as a state of diverse people. For many, it's a step too far.
We must stop this constitution with everything we've got. It's designed to divide us. A plurinational state will destroy our nation.
We're one land, one people, one law. We don't have different territories here.
The old constitution made us one of the strongest economies in Latin America. I don't want any experiment or to be ruled by globalization and the United Nations. They don't know themselves what plurinational state means.
What if the new constitution is passed?
It'd be a disaster.
No. No.
Está mala, está mala.
During the final few months of the constitutional reform process, there's a marked drop in support for the new draft. While most people initially backed it, now the majority opposes it. It seems Chileans are dissatisfied with not only the result, but the reform process too. Despite making it as transparent as possible with live broadcasts of the sessions, the directly elected members of the Constitutional Assembly are considered by many to be those up there, part of a political bubble with nothing in common with the average citizen. It's decision day. 3 years after protests began, more than 15 million Chileans can have their say. Will they adopt the draft that's been created by members of the convention? For the first time in years, voting is compulsory. Turnout is 86%. For Valentina Miranda, the new draft addresses the injustices of the dictatorship. For Raúl Celis, it's flawed, as is the reform process. In his eyes, the new constitution doesn't represent everyone.
Yo estoy por la opción del rechazo.
I'm going to turn it down. Because our central right ideas weren't taken into account at all. Our proposals were almost entirely rejected. The Constitution is really just a project endorsed by various left-wing groups.
Este proyecto de Constitución corresponde a un acuerdo entre las diversas izquierdas.
Yo creo que hay un gran temor a un cambio muy rápido y muy radical, ¿ya? Y creo que ahora se sintió...
In Chile, there's a great fear of rapid and radical change. Recently, there's been a lot of change over a short time, and that's causing a lot of uncertainty. The constitutional reform process began in 2019. Then we had the pandemic.
Las razones de la crisis social de 2019, la desigualdad.
And the causes of the 2019 crisis were only exacerbated. Social inequality, etc. Then came the economic crisis that many countries are going through, and huge uncertainty.
Y luego de la pandemia vino como consecuencia la crisis económica que hoy día vive Chile.
Criminality has risen too.
También vino una crisis de inseguridad, ¿ya? O sea, aumentó la sensación de inseguridad, aumentaron los niveles de crimen, de violencia.
All of that makes people reject change and yearn for stability instead.
Donde para lo que las personas buscaban eran ciertas certezas.
Even before the counts finished, it's clear that a majority is against the new constitution.
That's what happens when people are excluded.
In the end, 38% of people approve the new draft text. 62% are against it. Majorities across all parts of Chile oppose the draft.
We want a new constitution implemented that has everyone on board, where no one is excluded. One that's done well.
Ya. Vamos a caminar rápido, sí. Claro, compañero.
Sadly, the lies won out over democracy, but we will carry on. We are meeting now with members of a youth organization. You can't stop the process now. It's just beginning. That was a lesson for Chile.
What does the result mean for now? Firstly, the Pinochet-era constitution stays in place. But surveys show the majority doesn't want it either. There's still a desire for a new, improved constitution.
Pienso que la etapa que viene ahora va a ser la de los acuerdos.
This next stage will be a stage of agreement, like the time of the social protests at the end of 2019, when we triggered an acute crisis with the decision to write a new constitution.
Redactar una nueva constitución.
You cannot create a constitution overnight. It's a lengthy process, and this referendum is unlikely to be the end of it.
But it's still uncertain what that new reform process will look like. Who will write the second draft? How much of the first draft will remain? The newly elected government under left-wing President Gabriel Boric wants to carry on.
We have matured, and now we know exactly how not to do things.
The whole process was a big experiment for Chilean society, a dialogue in learning exactly what a constitution actually is and what proposals are needed for such a text. When we start a new process, it won't be from zero.
Así que el desafío que se viene ahora en adelante es poder llegar a esos sectores y
The challenge now is to carry on, to reach everyone, and to present the points that are important for us in a new draft constitution. Chile has to be a country of equal opportunities, ecology and plurinationalism, where the rights of the historically disadvantaged indigenous people are recognized, a struggle that we young people began a long time ago, and will continue. Right now, we're sad, but that will only last a day. We'll have a beer, and then we'll start again. Tomorrow is a new day.
What's the overriding feeling now, at the end of this process that began in 2019 and prematurely ended in 2022? Is it disappointment at a lost opportunity? Or hope that change is still to come? The majority in Chile wants a new basic order. It wants to bid farewell to the Pinochet-era constitution. A first attempt has failed, but at least for now the door appears open for another go.